go ahead and start. So we're going to be in John 21. Specifically, we'll be in John 21, 15 through 19. So last week, we actually were in the same area. I just wanted to include, we're in the same area. So we are post-resurrection. We've seen places where Jesus has come, and then in this section we have Jesus coming to them. They're now up in Galilee, up in the north. They've gone fishing. They've done some stuff, and so we get a picture of Jesus coming to the disciples and feeding them. And last week we talked about how here were the disciples who are returning to their normal life, right? So we often critique them because they didn't go straight into, being pastors or something like that. But like they had everything was up for grabs. They returned to their home. They went fishing. They were in the midst of their regular lives. And Jesus calls them and he points to how he is the way to do even those normal, regular things, like having breakfast, and that he provides for us in those ways. He provides our sustenance. And then they have breakfast, and then here we are. So I'm going to go ahead and start here. So we're going to start in 15 and read through 19. So when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my lambs." He said to him again a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to them, "Shepherd my sheep." He said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were younger, you used to gird yourself and walk wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone will gird you and bring you where you do not wish to go." Now this he said, signifying by what kind of death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, "Follow me." So this is, Peter is the disciple who throughout the book of John and in most of the Gospels, he's the one who we think of when we think of vocally talking about his devotion to Jesus, right? He is the one that we think of who blurts out things often, maybe not without thinking, but he's this disciple he's the one who says things. Last week we talked about how Jesus is on the shore, they're in the boat. John says to Peter, John is the one who recognized it's the Lord. Peter says, and jumps out of the boat and heads for Jesus without thinking. Well, he puts on we talked about that. Never mind. So this is the guy who impulsively and really wanted and is vocal about being devoted to Jesus. But here we see that Peter is the one who actually has led the people away. In some ways, he's the one who had the idea to go fishing. He's the one who had this idea. We see Peter kind of like going a little anchorless, if you will. And we know from before this that we had this whole thing with the three denials of Peter. And we're going to look at that a lot right today. We're actually going to spend a good amount of time with that. Because what we see here in this text is three questions where Jesus calls Simon to say that he loves him in response to the three times that he's specifically denied him. I want to notice here before we get too far. Jesus here, remember that Peter was named Simon. And we call him Peter because Jesus named him Peter. But here, at the very end, in this time, Jesus is calling him by that other name, Simon, son of John, right? So there is this sense that there is a real change, a real restoration happening here. Peter was Simon. And until Jesus restores him, he's just Simon and he's not Peter. And Jesus needs to restore him. And this is a critical part. And we can see, like yesterday when we talked about how Jesus came and cared for them and gave them breakfast, this small thing, because they needed it. Here we see at the same time that Peter is in need of this, and Jesus is ready to do it. It is important enough that John includes it. The author John includes it here, and it's like one of the last things in the book, right? This is Jesus reaching out. He's reached out to the whole disciples. He's reached out to the 8 who are in the boat. Now he's reaching out to Peter 1. Like we have that progression in other gospels where we see that Jesus is interested in the individual as well as the whole. So this is important to John. It's important to Peter. So I think that we need to look back and see why Peter needs this. We need to spend a little time because we didn't actually go through John. So let's go back to the Lord's Supper. So this is back to chapter 13. And Jesus has just got done washing the disciples' feet, and he's predicted that one of them is going to betray him that night. And then as soon as the betrayer leaves the supper, Jesus announces the time of his glorification has come. And then he tells his disciples, so starting at 33, "Little children, I am with you a little while longer. You will seek me, and as I said to the Jews, now I also say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. A new commandment I give you, that you love one another, even as I has loved you, that you also love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus answered, "Where I go, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow me later." Peter said to him, "Lord, why can't I follow you right now? I will lay down my life for you." Jesus answered, "Will you lay down my life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, a rooster will not crow until you deny me 3 times. I think that this is one of those places where we read into the text stuff that we know about the end, right? This is one of those places where we actually, I assume here what Peter means by "I will die for you." I read into it how Peter actually died. I know that Peter died a martyr's death. He died as a meek disciple, and he was killed for Jesus in that way. And I read that back into what Peter says. And I'm assuming that Peter is saying, "I will die as a meek disciple for you." So if that's the case, why does Jesus kind of come back so harshly, almost derisively say, "Oh yeah, you're gonna die for me"? And then he gives this like, "Tonight you will, you will die for me." No, you will not do that. Not only that, you're gonna deny me tonight. Why does Peter man, I get these two mixed up. Why does Jesus come back so harshly against Peter if Peter's saying, "I will lay down my life as a martyr for you"? Well, I think it's because that's not what Peter's saying. He's not saying that he will lay down his life as a martyr. So what is he saying? I am sure that he's not saying that, and it's not just me. I am sure that he's not saying, "I will be a meek follower and I will lay down my life for you," the death of a martyr, willingly dies to show his loyalty to his master. But I don't have to, this is not just me making this up. We can continue looking. We actually get more information about what Peter's mindset is here. So let's move forward to John 18. So in John 18, we've now had this whole session. They've walked over to the garden. And then at the beginning of 18, in 18:3, well, in 18:1, we have Judas who is putting this thing into play. And then in 18:3 it says, Judas then, having received the Roman cohort and officers of the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then there's a back and forth, and then in 10 and 11, a little later, Simon Peter then, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear, and the slave's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, put your sword away into its sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not drink it? Peter here is standing toe-to-toe with danger, right? Peter is standing with Jesus, facing the cohort of government soldiers and authorities, and he decides that now is when he'll assert his Second Amendment right to fight for the First Amendment right to freedom of religion. Oh, wait, wrong century. Peter is standing toe-to-toe with the cohort of Roman soldiers, a legion. A legion is made up of 10 cohorts. 10 cohorts make a legion of Roman soldiers. He is standing toe-to-toe with Roman soldiers, a cohort of soldiers and others, and decides that he will die with Jesus holding his sword in his hand. What were the chances of something else happening? He was ready to kill for Jesus and die. Except Jesus saves him from himself. Jesus saves him from himself here. Jesus tells him to put his sword away. This is what Peter had in mind. He was still thinking of armed revolt. Remember we talked about the Palm Sunday? They're calling Hosanna. They're calling for an armed revolt. They want the Romans out. Peter still has that in mind. That's still what he has in mind. He was talking in the same terms that we often talk about soldiers and sailors and Marines who promise to die for their country. That is not a meek promise. It's a very important promise. I'm not putting that down at all. But it's not a Christian promise. It's not the way that Christians come at it. Peter was not promising to lay down his life the same way we think about that. He is saying he has still got revolt in mind. But Jesus corrects Peter and says, should I reject the cup the Father places before me? The Father is putting this thing in front of me, this cup, this plan. He is putting it there. Should I reject God's plan? Should Peter reject God's plan? Now we see what Jesus is saying to Peter earlier. I don't want you to kill and be killed for me. You will draw a sword with me, but you will deny me when you are given the chance to sit in chains with me. Then later in chapter 18, we see that that's exactly what happened in the courtyard of Annas, around a charcoal fire. We see 3 times. First, he's trying to get into the courtyard. And the slave girl says, aren't you one of his disciples? And he says, no, I'm not. And then he gains access to the courtyard, and he's there with the rest. And it's interesting, in 18, going back there, the actual interaction, Simon Peter was standing there warming himself up, and they said to him, this is 18:25, you are not also one of the disciples, are you? And he denied it, and he said, I am not. And then 26 is interesting. One of the slaves of the high priest, being a relative of the one whose ear he had cut off, said, Did I not see you in the garden with him? And Peter then denied it again, and immediately a rooster crowed. Peter has been given the opportunity to sit with Jesus, to be that martyr along with Jesus, but he denies it, and he will not sit with him there. And this is where we see Peter, right? This is where we see Peter now. Can you imagine having done that and then actually see your master murdered, and then he comes back? Can you imagine being in that position? It's almost worse, isn't it? Here is your master who actually died and shows that he was powerful enough to deal with it himself. And you were trying to keep him from doing that. And you were like drawing your own sword to do something. It's Peter must be in pain. I think. I can imagine being in pain at this point in 21. Being in pain, right? Jesus needs to come back to him. I want to point out one other interesting thing. From chapter 18, we have this verse 14. It's just kind of tossed in there, and I think it is important to us, especially given what we've been talking about for the last few weeks. 14 says, "Now Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was expedient for one man to die on behalf of his people." This is Caiaphas, who's saying it's just going to be faster if we can get rid of this guy and have him die so the rest of us can get going. We talked about this last week. We talked about how all things that we do in our day-to-day lives, we need to be careful to be Christian in doing those things. And then even back further than that, when we were in Palm Sunday, I think we talked about the Barabbas, where they chose Barabbas. They chose the way of Barabbas rather than the way of Jesus. And here is another place where it's saying it doesn't matter how efficient you could be if you did this. If it's not what Christ would call you to, don't do it. Efficiency is not what we're called to. We're called to follow Jesus. So here we are, and we're going to go back to the first text that we had today in 21. Jesus and Peter are again gathered around a charcoal fire. Jesus was right there on the other side of the fire when he denied him. And here is Jesus also. They're both around a charcoal fire, warming themselves in front of the fire, and Peter is asked 3 more questions. And we see a difference in Peter's response. His response is different. The questions are mostly the same, and his answer is, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Exactly twice, and then one other time it's a little more emphatic, but it's still, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." So what's the difference in his response here? His response does not rest in confidence in his own strength at this point. He doesn't know his own love, but he has confidence that Jesus knows him. Jesus, the one who just died for him and rose again, knows that he loves him, and he is leaning in that rather than in his own strength, his own things that he could do. And his response, he has gone from a brash, self-confident disciple, right, who speaks up when he really shouldn't, like at the Transfiguration, to one who is humble and leans not on himself, even in whether or not he loves Jesus. He still is leaning on Jesus's knowledge of him. Remember back in 13 when Peter promises to follow Jesus anywhere? What is it that Jesus had just said? He had just said, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another." Jesus says to Peter, "Remember my commandment? Tend my sheep." Do that for my people. He is saying, tend my sheep, tend my flock, love my flock. Show your love for me by loving your flock, my flock. And then he tells Peter, "I do know that how you love me. You meant it in another way before, but you will die for me. I will give you the chance to do what you actually should, what I want you to do, to actually follow me to death, to actual death, to a meek death, to a disciple's death, in the same way that the master died. I will allow that to happen. Tending for my lambs means following my example. That is what they need. They need to see an example of someone living as if my example is livable. They need someone who actually believes that living that way is possible. They need to see that. Do that. You do that. We do need to do that too. That is our role too. That's our call too. We have that song, "By this all men shall know that we are disciples, that we love one another," right? We sing that song a lot. It is our call. That is what we have put before us. It's what Jesus wants us to do. And then Jesus fully restores Peter in that last verse, verse 19. He fully restores him and calls him again, "Follow me. Follow me." But now do Jesus' work his way, my work my way. And Jesus now knows that he can, because Jesus' power, the Spirit's power, is in him. Jesus knows that's true of him now, and he can actually call him to that. Follow me. Before, he said, "You can't go where I'm going yet." He did say that. He said, "You will, but not yet." Peter wanted to go right away. Jesus knew that he didn't actually have what he needed to do it, and he said, "Hold your horses." Now, he sees that Peter does have the power of the Spirit in him, and he can follow, and he re-emphasizes that initial call that was way back in John 1 when he called Simon sitting in the boat, said, "Follow me." And he did. And he reinstitutes that call on Peter, and it has a completely different meaning to him now because he has been empowered by the Spirit. And it is true for us too. We have the Spirit in us now. We have that same Spirit. We are able to follow Jesus. We are able, day by day, minute by minute, to make those choices that Jesus calls us to make because we have his power in us. He gives us the power to do that. We can do that. We can follow Jesus. That is our call. That is a huge call. We have the call, and we can follow Jesus. So follow him. Tend his flock. Feed his lambs. That's our call.